Welcome to a new episode of Gaming Origins, the series where we look at the origins and history of various topics in gaming. Today we're taking a look at a series that really doesn't need an introduction, but to those of you who have been living under a rock for the best part of 20 years, today we're taking a look at the Crash Bandicoot series, one of the most popular platformers from the 90s and also at one point one of PlayStation's biggest series. The first game, Crash Bandicoot, released in 1996 on the PS1 and was developed by the now very prestigious Naughty Dog, who wanted to create such series as Jak and Daxter and Uncharted. Be sure to check out the Jak and Daxter episode of Gaming Origins for more info on that series. Crash Bandicoot wasn't Naughty Dog's first game. In fact, they made a few unheard of games over the 10 years prior, such as Rings of Power for the Sega Genesis and Way of the Warrior for the 3DO. Crash Bandicoot began creation when Naughty Dog signed on with Universal Interactive for 3 additional games after they worked with them for Way of the Warrior. Gavin and Ruben at Naughty Dog decided they wanted to create a 3D platformer, and due to the camera looking from behind the character as opposed to side on like a traditional 2D platformer, dubbed the game Sonic's Ass Game. Crash went through several designs and names, originally set to be called Willy the Wombat, which was scrapped, thankfully. Crash's orange colour was also a clear design choice for the game, as they believed it would be a colour that would make Crash stand out from the game's backgrounds. Spyro, from Spyro the Dragon, was similarly coloured purple for the same reason. The story was pretty simple. Dr. Neo Cortex, the main villain of the series, who along with another is experimenting on wildlife, much to Peter's enjoyment. They use something called an Evolvo Ray, turning animals anthropomorphic. They use it on a male Bandicoot, creating Crash, although he is seen as a failure because the ray wasn't ready, and Crash escapes, eventually washing up on the shore of Twinsanity Beach, setting up the game with Cortex trying to stop Crash with various henchmen. Gameplay wise, it was a linear 3D platformer. You entered levels through a hub world map, and within each level there were boxes to break and Wumpa fruit to collect, which would add longevity to the game, as it's very unlikely you managed to collect them all first time around. The game was critically well received, scoring 80% on game rankings and the start of what would be many games in the series. Just a year later, and the inevitable sequel Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back released in 1997 on the PS1. Crash Bandicoot 2 was the first game to introduce Coco, who was created as a counterbalance to Crash's girlfriend from the first game, as Sony weren't happy with her apparently over-sexualized design, and Naughty Dog didn't want to change it, instead opting to remove her. Naturally, the story follows on from the first, in fact only seconds after the ending of the first game, seeing Cortex blast from the airship from the end battle, and lands in a pit with crystals that he sees as holding power he can use. Cortex warns Crash of a potential threat to the world and instructs him to collect these crystals for him to save the world supposedly, although with different motives in mind. The game had more responsive controls, resulting in less unfair deaths, gave Crash a few more additional moves such as a body slam and slide, and more varied levels that kept things fresh, as well as additional collectibles that added more potential playtime. The game was well received, scoring 89% on game rankings, higher than the first game. Crash 2 was praised for the warp room concept, improved saving and variety of its level design. Another development time of only a year, and we got Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped on the PS1 in late 1998, arguably the best Crash game released to date and a fan favourite for many. Crash 3 took the already great previous 2 games and bettered them again. The gameplay was once again tighter and more streamlined, the graphics were the best the series had seen, and levels were the most varied so far. This was largely thanks to the time element that was introduced, with levels dedicated to various different time periods, and thus meaning they all had very defined aesthetics from each other. More variety in the gameplay was introduced also. You had missions underwater, in a plane, on a motorcycle, and even riding a tiger across the Great Wall of China as Coco. Boss battles were the best so far also, especially when compared to the first game where they could be seen as a weaker aspect. Crash 3 scored 91% on Metacritic, the highest score the series had seen, and went on to sell over 5.7 million units worldwide by 2002. Finally, we're on to the last Naughty Dog developed Crash game, Crash Team Racing, which again released solely on the PS1. Crash Team Racing was, as the name suggests, a completely different game from its predecessors, a kart racing game that attempted to compete with Mario Kart. Crash Team Racing introduced a new villain, aptly named Nitrous Oxide, who is an alien who claims to be the fastest racer alive, and challenges Earth's best drivers, which apparently happens to be Crash and Co. If Earth wins, he'll leave, otherwise Earth is turned into a giant parking lot. The plot is simple and a little silly, but it was perfectly serviceable and interesting enough for a kart racer. The game has a hub world which you'll use to drive to each warp pad for each individual race. Completing a number of races will help you unlock various boss races the game offers. The game being a kart racer and competing with Mario Kart had a similar weapon system. You would drive through crates and be assigned a random power that would either protect you or help take out other racers. Crash Team Racing garnered 88% on Metacritic, being praised for how rock solid the gameplay was and how great a competitor it was to Mario Kart, where other similar kart races of the time had failed. It would be a couple more years before we would get more Crash Bandicoot, but this time it would be no longer by Naughty Dog, who at this point had moved on to Jak and Daxter, and thus begins Crash's slippery slope. Crash Bash was developed by Eurocom Entertainment Software and released at the end of 2000 for the PS1. Crash deviated once again from its platforming roots with a party game. There were a number of minigames you could play, some more fun than others, Polar Push being one of the more distinctly fun games I remember playing. There was a single player mode which was okay, although the game was far more enjoyable with friends, otherwise it could be a rather dull, uninteresting experience if playing solo. Critics seem to emulate this, noting the game's enjoyment more if played with others. Crash Bash scored a Metacritic of 68%, much lower than previous games in the series, but still a moderately okay reception. Another year and another Crash. Crash Bandicoot Wrath of Cortex released in 2001 and was this time developed by Traveller's Tales, although it was originally intended to be worked on by Mark Cerny, who worked on the previous titles. His vision for the game was a free-roaming platformer with puzzle elements that would see Crash travelling to different planets. Wrath of Cortex was the first Crash game to release outside of PlayStation consoles due to Universal entering a deal with Konami, releasing on PS2, Xbox and GameCube. This agreement served to break the exclusive deal of Crash on Sony consoles. Traveller's Tales attempted to create a standard Crash game aching to the original trilogy as opposed to the concept Mark Cerny originally had worked on, which was scrapped as he and Sony fell out with Universal. Wrath of Cortex introduced a new Bandicoot, Crunch, who would serve as a new antagonist to the game and would subsequently become a regular character in the series from this game forward. Despite playing as a more traditional Crash game, it didn't garner such great reception as those games, with an average of 68% on Metacritic across the 3 consoles it released on, generally noting how it really didn't do anything special or new. 2002 and 2003 saw 2 GBA Crash games, The Huge Adventure, or as it's known in Europe, XS, and Entranced, the first time Crash had been on a portable console. Both games were pretty similar, playing as a traditional Crash game only on a 2D plane. Both were critically well received, with The Huge Adventure scoring a Metacritic of 78% and Entranced scoring 75%. The games did a good job of shrinking the series down on a handheld and making them feel true to the original series, and despite being a GBA game, the graphics were pretty good for the time. In 2003, Crash returned to kart racing with Crash Nitro Kart, developed by Vicarious Visions. Interestingly, the game was titled Crash Team Racing 2 during pre-production and was the first game to feature CGI cutscenes. All games prior used in-engine models. Although Nitro Kart was praised by some reviewers for its good controls, it was put down for doing nothing really new compared to Crash Team Racing other than a new lick of paint. One critic described the game as probably one of the least exciting racing games they'd played, so although the game did emulate what Crash Team Racing was at its core, it ultimately wasn't nearly as fun. The console version of the game scored an average of 68%. In late 2004 we got a really interesting Crash release. Interesting because it was a 2-game crossover with Spyro. Crash Purple, Ripto's Rampage, or simply known as Crash Fusion over here in Europe, was a GBA game developed by Vicarious Visions that also saw a simultaneous release with Spyro Orange. The games were essentially 2D platformers, where in the case of Crash Purple, Crash would face various enemies from Spyro's world, and vice versa, and ultimately take down Ripto. Neither game were really very challenging, and the minigames were seen as a little bit boring. Once you'd beaten both games, I believe you could connect both of them for an additional ending, if I remember correctly. Crash Purple scored 67% overall, where Spyro Orange scored 60%. In the same year as Crash Purple, we also got Crash Twinsanity, a game that in my opinion was a little underappreciated. Crash Twinsanity was a relatively more open game with not too many linear levels. You played as Crash as you might expect, however this time around you team up with Cortex. The game has a nice humour to it and was genuinely funny and worked quite well, playing upon the relationship between Crash and Cortex. The game was quite short sadly and could be completed in a couple of hours. In my opinion, the game undeservingly received a Metacritic of only 65% overall, with the main criticisms being its level design and visuals. Personally, although I don't believe it comes close to the original trilogy, it did take the series in an interesting new direction with some success and was one of my favourite non-Naughty Dog developed games. In 2005, Crash Tag Team Racing released and tried to some extent emulate what Mario Kart Double Dash did with 2 characters per vehicle. Although the game was a kart racer, in the hub world you would run around as Crash on foot, completing platforming elements, collecting boxes and other aspects you would expect in a traditional Crash game. Once again, another Crash kart racer that failed to capture what Naughty Dog did to make Crash Team Racing so great. The game was put down mostly for its difficulty, or lack of, uninspired tracks and poor load times for the PSP version, scoring very similarly to Nitro Kart with 76%. Next is Crash Boom Bang that released on the DS in 2006, and the less said the better honestly. Boom Bang was a party game in the same way that Crash Bash was, however it just really wasn't very good. The game was criticised for its dull minigames and the only Crash-like aspect of the game being its aesthetics. The game was given the lowest Metacritic of any Crash game so far of only 37%. 2007 was a pretty big change for Crash Bandicoot when Radical Entertainment took the helm at the next game in the series. The game changed up many of the fundamentals such as character designs. Many if not all main characters had pretty substantial design changes, with some being virtually unrecognisable. Aside from a more open world design, the biggest change to the gameplay was the combat. Crash can use his normal attacks, however he also has the ability to jack Titans, a new enemy that play a large role in the game. Crash of the Titans interestingly introduced co-op where a friend can join the game at any time. The game ultimately received mixed reviews, criticised for lacking the distinctive style of past Crash games, scoring an average of 68%. The mixed reviews of Crash of the Titans didn't stop a sequel, as a year later we got Crash Mind Over Mutant. Mind Over Mutant was developed by the same developer, Radical Entertainment, and was a pretty similar game. The redesigns remained, as did the Riding of the Titans feature, although a new feature was introduced where you could effectively pocket the Titans for later use for when you need them instead of abandoning them. Across all its releases, the game scored once again mixed reviews of 62%. Reviewers noted that the console versions were slightly better than Crash of the Titans, but still had major issues such as the camera. This would also be the last Crash game we would get for a long time. Fast forward 8 years and Crash's next appearance would be as a playable character in the latest Skylanders game, along with a level to match. This marks another time Crash has been in a game with Spyro, who's been a playable character in every Skylanders so far. Finally, that leads us up to 2017 with the Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy releasing in June, which is a remake of the original 3 games. This could be a big comeback for the Crash series and the first really good game in a long time. I'm not going to go into any more detail than that because I plan to do a full video surrounding this game sometime in the near future, so look out for that. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. It took a long time to put together. Click the thumbnail on the left to watch the Jack and Daxter Gaming Origins video, or the one on the right to watch the last episode of Gaming Origins on Sly Cooper. Leave a like and sub if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching as usual, and I'll see you on the next video.